The instant Scarlett Taylor's hand touched my mailbox, the world seemed to pause, then came the zap. A sharp crackle, a flash of blue, and the mighty president of our HOA jumped 3 feet backward like she'd grabbed a live snake. Her scream echoed down Maple Creek Lane, sharp enough to wake every nosy neighbor within 50 yards. She shook her hand, eyes bulging, hair frizzed from static, staring at my mailbox like it had just committed a crime against humanity. I stood at my window, coffee steaming in my hand, and whispered, "Lesson delivered." For months, Scarlett had been stealing my mail quietly, confidently, thinking no one would ever catch her. So, I gave her a little reminder that actions have consequences. The system was perfectly legal, non-lethal, and most importantly, unforgettable. But here's the twist: she wasn't stealing at random. No, she had a reason, one tangled deep in old grudges and HOA politics. Before we dive into how an electric jolt turned the most powerful woman on my street into neighborhood gossip, comment where you're watching from and hit subscribe. Trust me, this one's going to light up your day. 8 months before the incident, life on Maple Creek Lane was quiet, predictable, and just boring enough to make me think I'd finally escaped chaos. After years of freelancing from cramped apartments and coffee shops, I'd saved enough to buy my dream home, a cozy 2-story colonial with a maple tree out front, a white fence, and a mailbox that looked straight out of a Norman Rockwell painting. For a while, it was perfect. Mornings smelled like freshly cut grass, and the mail truck arrived right on time, bringing paychecks, client contracts, and the occasional Amazon impulse purchase. I'd sip coffee on the porch, wave at passing joggers, and pretend that suburbia wasn't secretly one big performance of people trying to out-polite each other. Then the mail started disappearing. At first it was small stuff. Junk flyers, coupons, political ads, the kind of paper you actually wish someone would take. I shrugged it off, assuming the wind had blown them away. But then my bank statement stopped arriving. My insurance renewal letter never showed. And one morning I realized my tax documents, those beautifully boring envelopes stamped important IRS, correspondence, had vanished too. Losing one envelope is an accident. Losing 5 is sabotage. Still, I gave the benefit of the doubt. I filed a missing mail report online and called the post office. A woman named Linda assured me in the kind of tone that suggested she'd rather be anywhere else that all my mail had been scanned and delivered successfully. Delivered where I asked. She clicked her keyboard. "Your address, sir. 127 Maple Creek Lane. Then either my mailbox is a portal," I said, "or someone's stealing my mail." Linda chuckled awkwardly and hung up before I could ask for security footage. By the next week, the consequences started rolling in. My electric bill arrived late, my credit card company slapped me with a missed payment fee, and one of my biggest clients called to ask why I hadn't signed and returned their contract. $50,000. Gone not because I messed up, but because a piece of paper disappeared somewhere between the curb and my front door. That night, I sat at my desk, staring at the empty mailbox outside my window. The street was silent except for the hum of sprinklers and the occasional bark of a dog. But something felt off. The kind of wrongness that buzzes in your teeth before you can name it. The next morning, while talking to my neighbor Helen, a retired teacher who knows everything about everyone, I casually mentioned my missing mail. She frowned. "That's strange. Scarlett's been walking around checking mailboxes lately." Scarlett Taylor, Helen whispered, like we were discussing the mafia, our HOA president. She said she was making sure nobody's violating the community aesthetic code. You know how she is. Oh, I knew. Everyone knew. Scarlett Taylor was the self-appointed queen of Maple Creek, mid-50s, always in pastel blazers and pearl earrings, driving a white Mercedes that somehow sparkled even on cloudy days. She had a way of smiling that made you feel like you'd failed a test you didn't know existed. People called her concerned. I called her performatively obsessed with control. Rumor had it she once fined a neighbor $50 for leaving their garbage cans out 3 hours too long. Another time she had a landscaper fired because he trimmed her hedges at an unsatisfactory angle. The woman treated bylaws like scripture and everyone else like sinners. Still, I wanted proof before making accusations, so I did what any rational adult who's watched too many detective shows would do. I installed a camera. Not a big obvious one that would tip her off. No, I hid a small motion-activated lens inside a wooden birdhouse next to my mailbox. It had a perfect view of anyone who walked by. I even tested it by pretending to grab my own mail a few times. Worked flawlessly. For 3 days, nothing happened. Mail arrived, I collected it, and I started to think maybe I was just paranoid. Then on the 4th morning, the footage changed everything. It was 2:37 p.m., a sunny Wednesday. She said she was making sure nobody's violating the community aesthetic code. You know how she is. Oh, I knew. Everyone knew. Scarlett Taylor was the self-appointed queen of Maple Creek. Mid-50s, always in pastel blazers and pearl earrings, driving a white Mercedes that somehow sparkled even on cloudy days. She had a way of smiling that made you feel like you'd failed a test you didn't know existed. People called her concerned. I called her performatively obsessed with control. No gloves, no disguise, just Scarlett, doing her daily round of federal crimes like she was collecting mail on behalf of God himself. The next day, it happened again, and again, and again. Different times, same routine, check the street, take what she liked, leave what she didn't. I started compiling clips, labeling them by date and time. It became a ritual. Coffee in the morning, mail theft surveillance at night. I told myself I'd confront her when I had enough evidence. Then Helen stopped by again, leaning on her cane eyes twinkling. Did you figure out the mail mystery? Not yet, I said, smiling too hard. But I think I'm about to send someone a shocking message. She raised a brow. What do you mean? Let's just say the HOA's about to learn about boundary enforcement, the electric kind. I wasn't kidding. By that weekend, I'd printed a dozen screenshots showing Scarlett's hand halfway inside my mailbox. I walked over to her house, big white columns, flowers, perfectly symmetrical like soldiers, and knocked. She opened the door, that same patronizing smile glued to her face. Daniel, what a surprise. Is everything all right? Oh, everything's fine, I said, holding up the stack of papers. Except for the part where you keep stealing my mail. Her smile faltered for half a second, just long enough to confirm I was right. Then she laughed. Stealing? Oh, no. I was simply checking for misdelivered letters. Our mailboxes look so similar. They're different colors, I said. And yours is on another street. Before she could answer, her husband Brad appeared, golf shirt tucked in, face red and self-important. You accusing my wife of a crime, he barked. That's harassment. Defamation. I have video, I said calmly. Then you should be careful who you show it to, he snapped. HOA doesn't tolerate troublemakers. They shut the door. I was simply checking for misdelivered letters. Our mailboxes look so similar. They're different colors, I said, and yours is on another street. Before she could answer, her husband Brad appeared, golf shirt tucked in, face red and self-important. You accusing my wife of a crime, he barked. That's harassment. Defamation. I have video, I said calmly. Then, you should be careful who you show it to, he snapped. HOA doesn't tolerate troublemakers. They shut the door. She had the HOA, her husband, and the local bureaucracy wrapped around her manicured finger. 2 days later, I received an official notice from the HOA violation. Unauthorized surveillance equipment visible from public property. I laughed out loud. She'd turned my evidence into her weapon. That night, as I poured a drink and replayed the footage again, I felt something new, not anger, not even frustration, but the cold, creative spark of inspiration. If the system couldn't stop her, I'd have to build one that could. I looked at the birdhouse camera, smiled, and muttered, All right, Scarlett, let's see how you handle a little feedback. The plan had already begun forming in my head, wires, switches, motion sensors. Nothing lethal, nothing crazy, just poetic justice with a touch of voltage. Little did I know by the time it was over that Mailbox would be famous. I didn't sleep much that week. My mind was buzzing with every possible explanation, excuse, and counterattack. Maybe the camera caught something wrong, I thought. Maybe it was just a misunderstanding. But then I'd replay the footage and watch Scarlett Taylor, HOA president and self-proclaimed guardian of neighborhood integrity, stealing my mail like a raccoon in pearls. There was no misunderstanding. There was only arrogance and opportunity. By Monday morning, I'd set up a second camera. This one had night vision, higher frame rate, and audio recording. If Scarlett so much as breathed near my mailbox, I'd know. I even moved my desk so I could see the street from my office window. I wasn't paranoid anymore, I was focused. The next afternoon, right on schedule, her Mercedes glided to a stop. Engine purring, sunglasses gleaming, she stepped out with a clipboard in hand, the symbol of every HOA tyrant. She pretended to inspect a neighbor's lawn, then turned, looked left, looked right, and walked toward my mailbox like she'd been summoned by evil itself. I hit record. Scarlett opened the flap, sorted through the stack, and as casual as a morning routine, picked 3 envelopes that looked important. She tapped them against her, palm closed the mailbox, and walked away whistling. That was theft number 5. By the end of the week, I had over a dozen clips, all time-stamped clear as day. In one, she even paused to read the return address. I zoomed in later and saw my client's company logo. She wasn't just stealing, she was targeting. Something in me shifted that night. The polite, easygoing freelancer who once believed in neighborly understanding was gone. I dealt with corporate scammers, shady clients, and late payments, but never a thief who smiled at me every morning while committing federal crimes. So I did what I do best. I prepared my presentation. I printed screenshots, 8 of them each, showing her hand in the act. I even circled her wedding ring in red ink, just in case she claimed it wasn't her. I stapled them together and walked down to her house the next morning. I dealt with corporate scammers, shady clients, and late payments, but never a thief who smiled at me every morning while committing federal crimes. So I did what I do best. I prepared my presentation. I printed screenshots, 8 of them each, showing her hand in the act. I even circled her wedding ring in red ink just in case she claimed it wasn't her. I stapled them together and walked down to her house the next morning. Her eyes flickered from image to image, the color draining from her face before she recovered with the speed of a seasoned politician. "Well, this is ridiculous," she laughed, forced and brittle. "I was simply ensuring no one's mail got misplaced. The mail carrier often confuses boxes around here." "Does he also confuse streets?" I asked. "Because you live on Oak Ridge 2 blocks away." Her smile didn't crack, it froze. "You're being dramatic. You can't seriously think I'd steal mail." "I don't have to think it," I said. "I recorded it." At that moment, her husband Brad appeared behind her. Brad was a retired lawyer who still dressed like court was in session, polo tucked in belt, cinched tight enough to cut off circulation, the kind of man who quotes bylaws at dinner parties. "Is there a problem here?" he demanded. "Just showing your wife what the federal definition of mail theft looks like," I replied. Brad's jaw clenched. "You're accusing my wife of a felony. I'm presenting evidence," I said evenly. "Would you like a copy?" He stepped closer. "You better watch yourself, son. HOA doesn't take kindly to harassment or slander." "I'm not slandering," I said. "I'm documenting." The conversation ended with a door slammed hard enough to rattle the porch lights. The next day, an email arrived from the HOA board. Subject line, "Notice of violation. Unauthorized surveillance equipment." I laughed so hard, I nearly spilled my coffee. Scarlett had weaponized the HOA to punish me for catching her committing a crime. Classic Karen warfare. But I wasn't backing down. I filed a report at the police station that afternoon, bringing the printed screenshots and raw video files. Officer Ramirez, a friendly man with weary eyes, took one look and sighed. "This is compelling," he said, scratching his chin. "But unless we can prove she kept the mail or tampered with it intentionally, it's a gray area. You could try federal postal inspectors, but it'll take weeks. So she can just keep doing it." He nodded reluctantly. "Pretty much, yeah. We can warn her, but without recovered mail, we can't charge her." I left the station feeling like I'd just attended a masterclass in bureaucratic impotence. By the time I got home, another HOA envelope was waiting in my box. This one read, "Failure to maintain community mailbox standards, fine $100. Scarlett was fast, I'll give her that. That night, I sat on my porch staring at that same metal box, the one that had become the battlefield of my suburban life. The cicadas hummed, the sprinklers ticked, and somewhere down the street I could hear Scarlett laughing with her friends. The rage that bubbled up wasn't the loud kind. It was quiet, precise. The kind that engineers feel before building something that's going to prove a point. So I opened my laptop and started researching. Mailbox protection, I typed. Then non-lethal electric deterrent systems. Then, for fun, how many volts can a Karen handle before learning empathy? The deeper I read, the more fascinating it got. There were laws protecting mailboxes under federal jurisdiction, yes, but nothing that said I couldn't secure mine. There were dozens of guides for farmers, engineers, even pranksters. One forum post said, 12 volts won't kill anyone. It'll just make them regret their choices. Perfect. The next morning I called my old college buddy Marcus, an electrical engineer with a wicked sense of humor and zero moral hesitation. "Marcus," I said, "you ever electrify a mailbox?" He paused. "Not yet, but I'm listening." By the end of the call, we had a blueprint. A small circuit powered by a 12-volt battery triggered by the mailbox door. It would emit a sharp static discharge, more surprise than harm. Just enough for someone like Scarlett to learn what boundaries feel like. We agreed to add a sound component, a warning beep, right before activation. Legally compliant, morally satisfying. Dude, Marcus laughed. "It's basically a very aggressive doorbell." "Exactly," I said, "and she's overdue for a wake-up call." That night I reviewed every clip one last time. Scarlett's smug little expression, the casual flick of her wrist as she stole what wasn't hers, it burned into my brain like a bad song on repeat. I opened a new folder on my computer and labeled it Operation Mail Shock. My goal wasn't revenge, it was education. And if Scarlett Taylor wanted to keep her fingers in other people's business, then I was about to teach her that some lessons are best learned through current events. I turned off my monitor, poured a drink, and whispered to the dark street outside, "You wanted power, Scarlett. Now you're gonna get it." The next phase had officially begun. I hadn't planned on becoming an amateur electrical engineer, but then again I hadn't planned on living next to a woman who treated other people's mail like community property. After the police shrug and the HOA's passive-aggressive fines, my options narrowed to two things: accept losing money and dignity, or build something that made stealing inconvenient and memorable. I chose memorable. First step: research. I barricaded myself behind my desk like a man preparing for a very tiny war. My browser history that week was a glorious mess: mailbox security laws, non-lethal electric deterrents, how to protect property legally, and a dozen forum threads written by farmers arguing about shock levels for marauding raccoons. Between federal code summaries and Reddit threads titled, "Don't be a jerk, but also don't let thieves be jerks," I started to understand the rules of the game. There were a couple of big takeaways. One, tampering with mail is a federal crime. That meant if I could show a consistent pattern of theft, I could escalate beyond HOA politics, but that required recovered mail or corroborating evidence, both of which Scarlett had a talent for obliterating. Two, the law didn't explicitly forbid owners from protecting their property with reasonable deterrents as long as you posted clear warnings and didn't attempt to seriously harm anyone. In plain English, you couldn't booby-trap a mailbox with lethal intent, but a legal, low-voltage, startling alert that deterred thieves with signage was a thing people did, mostly on farms. Occasionally in suburban revenge fantasies, armed with legal snippets and a deepening sense of purpose, I rang Marcus. Marcus and I had been roommates in college, swapping instant ramen for questionable life advice. He was now an electrical engineer with a laugh that made every bad plan feel half bad and half inevitable. When I explained the situation, he didn't even ask whether I'd lost my mind. He asked which components I wanted to use. "Keep it simple and legal," I said. "I want them startled, not hospitalized." Marcus whistled. "We'll build a system that's basically a very aggressive doorbell. Motion triggered a loud warning, beep then a short harmless pulse if someone goes ahead and sticks their hand in. 12 volts capacitor-based. Strong, static, more electric slap than electrocution. Also, from the legal side, we should add a visible warning label, 'Property protected, do not touch.' That'll show good faith." We met in his garage that weekend, which smelled of solder and yesterday's coffee. Marcus showed me a schematic on a napkin like we were plotting a heist in reverse. The setup was delightfully low-tech: a 12-volt sealed lead-acid battery for power, a relay triggered by a magnetic reed switch, or a micro-motion sensor mounted inside the mailbox door, a small capacitor to create a brief pulse, and an audio module to play a loud beep before the pulse executed. The circuit had to be insulated, waterproofed, and reproducible. Marcus laughed when I asked whether it would fit in my mailbox without making it look like a sci-fi prop. "It'll be clean," he said. "You'll have one discrete camera, the electronics in a small weatherproof box under the mailbox, and a decoy speaker that plays the beep. Nobody's going to suspect anything until they do. Then they'll suspect everything." We spent 2 evenings soldering and testing. Marcus volunteered to be the first sacrificial test subject because college roommates have weirdly specific loyalties. He stuck his finger into a mock-up mailbox and let the circuit do its work. The pulse was a sharp, surprising shock, enough to make him yank back and swear, but not enough to make his heart stop. He grinned at me through clenched teeth. "That's perfect." Startlement with a side of humility. We calibrated everything carefully. Too weak, and Scarlett would think it a prank and come back for more. Too strong, and I'd be the idiot who taught a woman in pearls to dread metal forever. We also added a fail-safe. The system would automatically disable for delivery personnel during typical USPS hours. Marcus programmed a simple daytime window and added a manual disarm switch I could access from inside the house. We slapped on a weatherproof enclosure, wrapped all wires, and attached a backup camera with night vision so nothing could be argued away later. Before installation, I printed a small, unglamorous warning sign. The sign was legally worded enough to satisfy any inspector and blunt enough to satisfy my spine: "Property protected, do not touch." Electric deterrent installed. I considered adding a polite emoji, but decided against it. This was justice, not a meme. The installation itself was almost fun, in a childish, clandestine way. Marcus came over late on a Sunday while most neighbors did what suburban people do on Sundays: mow, sip iced tea, and avoid conflict. We repaired my mailbox's cover-tightening bolts, resealing edges, and mounting the birdhouse camera with the stealth of 2 men, who knew they were doing something a little ridiculous and wholly necessary. I told myself it was for security, for sanity, for the elderly neighbors who deserved their birthday cards back. Marcus soldered the final joint, and we tucked the electronics into a small box beneath the mailbox post, where it would be secure and weather-resistant. "Put the sign up too," Marcus said, as if parenting my future karma. "We want zero ambiguity." I hammered the sign into the post, stepped back, and felt the strange satisfaction of someone who'd crossed from victim to architect. The birdhouse camera faced the box, the backup camera covered the street, and the motion sensor hungrily awaited any unlawful fingertip. It felt theatrical, but it also felt right. Before flipping the system live, I ran an internal checklist like an anxious pilot. Is the beep loud enough? Check. Is the pulse short and non-lethal? Check. Does the USPS disabling function work? Check. Is the sign readable from 3 feet away? Check. Did Marcus hide a tiny made by Marcus and Daniel sticker inside the enclosure? Of course he did. Some things are too precious to leave unmarked. We tested it one more time. Marcus pressed the sensor with his fingertip. The beep blared like an angry microwave, his hand jolted, and he danced back, arms flailing like a man trying to shake off a cartoon. We both laughed until our sides hurt. It felt absurd and righteous in equal measure. That night, while tucking the equipment schematic into a folder labeled Evidence, I wrote the system's operating parameters on my palm in pen. Who knew when bureaucracy would want details? I also emailed Officer Ramirez to say I'd taken reasonable measures to protect my property and that I had video evidence of ongoing theft. I didn't ask for permission. I asked for documentation in case the situation escalated. If the worst happened, if Scarlett decided to cry to the feds before doing something truly reckless, I wanted a paper trail. As I went to bed, I pictured Scarlett in her coral blazer fingers hovering over an envelope she had no right to, ready to take what she wanted. I imagined the beep, the surprise, and the look on her face when something she thought was hers suddenly wasn't. It was petty, sure. It was also precise. I told myself it wasn't revenge, it was corrective education. The next morning, with the system armed and my heart rhythm slightly faster than normal, I sat at my desk watching the live feed. The mailbox gleamed in the morning sun, the sign readable, the birds oblivious. It was a beautiful, quiet little trap. I took a breath and muttered, half to the universe and half to the detective in me. Let's see how she likes being on the receiving end of a lesson. I hit the arm switch and watched the little red LED pulse ready. Monday morning felt electric for a different reason. I woke up early, more nervous than I expected, and brewed coffee like it was a ritual. The mailbox stood at attention beneath the maple tree, its little flag politely down the warning sign nailed to the post like a tiny moral billboard. The birdhouse camera blinked innocently. The backup cam peered down the street like a nosy neighbor with a vengeance. I'd staged a handful of things to make the day go right. A few envelopes that looked seriously official, crisp paper, faux bank logos, and return addresses I'd fabricated for dramatic effect sat in the box like expensive bait. I calibrated my streaming feed, checked the timestamps, and reminded myself very seriously that this was about evidence and boundaries, not schadenfreude. That lasted until I caught my reflection in the window and practiced my calm but firm face. I'd never been a revolutionary, but I'd had enough of someone else rewriting the rules between my front walk and the curb. For the first couple of hours, nothing. The postman arrived, tipped his hat, and did his job. The system's delivery-safe window held true. The mailbox behaved like an ordinary mailbox for a professional. The beep would have been tragicomic if it ever interrupted a uniformed worker, so I'd made sure to avoid that. The whole setup was designed to be embarrassing, not catastrophic humiliation over harm. That was a principle I could sleep with. Afternoon brought the heat and the slow slide of neighborhood life toward evening gossip. Lawns sparkled, sprinklers hissed, and more than one person in the cul-de-sac took their customary walk. I watched every car in the live feed with a level of intensity I reserve for client pitches. A kid rode his bike with a cape flapping. Mrs. Peterson watered her hydrangeas and then poked out to wave hello. Everything was ordinary and maddeningly peaceful. Then, like the final act in a play you've been waiting for, Scarlett's Mercedes appeared at the end of the lane. She rolled down the window like she owned summer itself and surveyed the street with that practiced expression, equal parts concern and entitlement. She lingered a moment, straightened a glove, and stepped out with the same choreography she'd worn to every HOA meeting, shoulders back, clipboard at the ready, smile like a seal. She walked with purpose as if her shoes clicked in, Morse code spelling out, "I run this town." My heart did a thing I'd only felt once before when a client unexpectedly upgraded a contract tight, excited, slightly nauseous. I kept my hand steady on the mouse and hit the record button. Scarlett strolled up to the mailbox like a woman taking a leisurely inventory of the world. She glanced left and right, put the clipboard to her chest with a tiny flourish, and slid the lid open. For a second, the world narrowed to the silver hinge of the box and the movement of her hand. She took the decoy envelope with the faux legal crest. She paused, the kind of pause people use when reading something they think confirms everything they already believed, and then she reached deeper greedy for whatever else looked official. That's when the warning beep cut, the air shrill and theatrical, like a tiny town crier, declaring, "This is not for you." She froze. Her cheek twitched. I could see the confusion ripple across her face through the grainy feed. For 2 lovely heartbeats, she considered retreat. She dropped the envelope back into the box and peered into it like someone double-checking a receipt. Then, with the bravado of someone who thinks rules apply to other people, she put her other hand in. The reaction was immediate. Scarlett flung backward as if struck by an invisible hand. Her coral blazer ballooned out as she stumbled onto the grass, and the clipboard went skittering across the walkway. She looked like a marionette whose strings were being yanked by a particularly petty puppeteer. She screamed a sound that had surprise and fury braided together. It was the kind of yell that announces you're both victim and villain in your own story. Her manicure fanned open as she shook her hand like a woman trying to dislodge the memory of pain. I almost laughed. I almost cried. Mostly I felt a bizarre, precise satisfaction, like untying a knot I'd been staring at for months. Neighbors started to emerge. A dozen faces leaned out of windows and doorways, and the neighborhood's natural chorus of curiosity swelled. Someone down the block snapped a video with their phone. Someone else called out, "You okay?" like a neighbor who hopes the answer is a polite yes. Scarlett scrambled to her feet, cheeks flushed with indignation and embarrassment. She looked around as if expecting applause or an ambush, and then stormed toward my house. Her shoes sank into my lawn as she advanced, angry bolts of dignity sparking from her like a cheap special effect. She pounded at my door with the intensity of someone accusing the cosmos of poor taste in revenge strategies. I opened the door with the calm I'd practiced the mirror. Scarlett launched into full-throttle outrage, voice sharp enough to cut through the hum of lawnmowers. She accused me of setting a booby trap. She called me every colorful name the HOA handbook could inspire, without offering a monetary refund clause. She wanted the police. She wanted the HOA board. She wanted a public apology, and ideally a parade to wash away whatever public humiliation might stick. I stood there, hands visible, and pointed to the sign. "It's right there," I said, "property protected. Do not touch." Her reply was a list of legal threats she intended to file the following week. She declared that I had endangered the community, that I had assaulted a community leader, that I had weaponized my property. Neighbors watched through windows and down porches like jurors in a live-action trial. Some mouths were pinched with outrage. Some were pursed with delight. Mrs. Peterson clutched her pearls with one hand and dabbed at her eye with the other. She looked at me with a gratitude that made me want to hand her a bouquet. Brad Scarlett's husband appeared at her side, like a less glamorous bodyguard. He adjusted an invisible tie and demanded to speak with the police. Within minutes, someone had called them. Someone had uploaded a shaky, grainy clip to an HOA chat. Gossip is a wildfire in suburbia. It spreads with the efficiency of both outrage and sweetness. Cops arrived, not with an air of condemnation, but with professional confusion, because the situation looked like a sitcom and a crime drama had a baby. Officers took statements, photographed the scene, and to their credit tried not to giggle. I showed them the footage, the weeks of theft compiled and labeled, and watched the color drain from Scarlett's forehead. Her narrative unraveled under the weight of time-stamped images and neighborly corroboration. She swore, she cried, she threatened, and then she pounded back at the mailman with accusations of clerical incompetence. The more she spoke, the more the neighborhood's mood shifted. What began as a spectacle was turning into a community reckoning. People I'd nodded to for months now met my eyes differently, and some offered small tentative apologies for not saying anything sooner. While the officers took notes, I stood on my porch, half-miffed homeowner and half-content moral engineer, and watched Scarlett argue herself into a corner. Her fury was magnificent and ineffective. She was the kind of person who thinks power is a VIP pass to other people's privacy, and the day had come when that pass was revoked politely and publicly. When the police left with their clipboard and patient expressions, Scarlett didn't go quietly. She filed an HOA complaint that evening, accusing me of endangering the community. The HOA board predictably sent an automated acknowledgement promising to review the matter. Meanwhile, the neighbors whispered and compared notes. Some admitted to missing cards and packages over the years. Others nodded sadly when I handed them printouts. By sunset, Maple Creek Lane had a new story to tell, the day the president of the HOA learned that some fences and mailboxes are not for her to cross. I brewed another cup of coffee while the porch light blinked on, and for a fleeting moment the street felt less like a show and more like a place where people quietly defended each other. I'd set the trap, and it had worked better than I dared hope. The next act's legal reviews, neighbor confessions, and the slow, satisfying unraveling of a petty tyrant were still to come. But right there, with the taste of victory as sharp as espresso on my tongue, I realized that sometimes the simplest systems are the most instructive. Scarlett didn't knock the next morning. She hammered on my front door like she was trying to break through a fortress. Her shrill voice echoed through the hallway before I even reached for the handle. "Open this door right now, you psychopath," she screamed. "You assaulted me. That was an electric weapon." I took my time. Partly because I wanted to enjoy her fury, partly because it's fun to make a bully wait. When I finally opened the door, she stood there, hair frizzed from yesterday's shock mascara, streaked coral blazer wrinkled like it had survived a thunderstorm. Her husband Brad hovered behind her, phone in hand, already recording. "Scarlett," I said calmly, "you look charged this morning." Her face twisted. "This isn't funny. You attacked me. You booby-trapped your mailbox like some deranged lunatic. That's illegal." I raised my eyebrows. Illegal would be tampering with someone else's mailbox, which, if you remember, is a federal crime. Want me to quote the statute? Her jaw clenched. Brad jumped in, his voice dripping with that smug HOA lawyer confidence. "My wife was conducting official HOA business. She had reason to believe your mailbox was in violation of community standards." I laughed, not loudly, just enough to hurt his pride. "In violation of community standards, Brad, the HOA doesn't own federal property. You can regulate fence colors and mailbox shapes, but you don't own the U.S. Postal Service. Don't you talk to me like that," Scarlett snapped. "You think your little prank makes you clever. You could have killed me, Scarlett," I said slowly. "It was 12 volts. My garden solar lights are deadlier than that." Her voice cracked. "I'm calling the police." "You'll be arrested for assault and for creating a public hazard." "Great," I said. "While they're here, we can show them the videos of you stealing my mail. I've got months of footage all labeled and dated. I'm sure they'll love to see it." For the first time since I'd met her, Scarlett hesitated. Her eyes darted to Brad, who looked at me with the weary expression of a man realizing his wife might have walked them both off a cliff. Still, pride is a powerful drug. "You won't get away with this," she said, jabbing a finger toward me. "I run this community." "Correction," I said, smiling. "You ran this community. But electricity travels faster than gossip, and I'm pretty sure both are against you now." 10 minutes later, 2 police cruisers arrived. Deputy Harris, a tall man with the calm patience of someone who's dealt with more HOA drama than war zones, stepped out. "All right," he sighed, notebook in hand. "Who wants to start?" Scarlett launched into her speech like she'd been rehearsing it all night. "This man has created a dangerous, illegal contraption that electrocuted me. He endangered the entire neighborhood. I demand his arrest and immediate removal of that device." Harris nodded slowly. "Uh-huh. And why exactly were you touching his mailbox, ma'am?" Her lips parted. I was performing a community inspection of his personal mailbox." "Yes," she insisted. "It's part of our HOA jurisdiction." The deputy turned to me. "Sir," I handed him a flash drive. "All the footage, officer. From 4 cameras. It shows Mrs. Taylor repeatedly stealing mail from my box over the past 2 months." Scarlett gasped. "That's a lie," he fabricated, "ma'am." Harris interrupted, tone, "Flat tampering with mail is a federal offense. If what's on this drive is true, you might want to stop talking." Her mouth snapped shut. Brad muttered something under his breath that sounded suspiciously like "I told you so." The deputy plugged the drive into his patrol car laptop. Scarlett paced, hands trembling, as the first clip played her sauntering up to my mailbox, stealing envelopes like she was collecting coupons. The deputy's eyebrows shot up. He didn't even bother hiding his smirk. When the video reached the part where she got zapped, he chuckled softly. "She really, jumped, huh?" I nodded. 12 volts of accountability, officer." Scarlett turned scarlet. "This is harassment. I'm the victim here." "No, ma'am," Harris said, shaking his head. "You're the suspect. And he's within his rights. The sign is clear, the system is non-lethal, and his footage shows months of evidence. You touched private property after repeated warnings. Frankly, you're lucky he didn't press charges sooner." Brad rubbed his temples. "Deputy, is there a way to make this go away?" "Sure," Harris said dryly. "If she stops committing federal crimes." Scarlett's voice dropped to a hiss. "You can't humiliate me like this. I'm the HOA president, and I'm the guy who pays taxes," I said. We all have our titles. Harris returned the flash drive and handed me a copy of his report. Mr. White, you're in the clear. Keep this documentation in case she tries something else. Mrs. Taylor, consider yourself formally warned. If I get another call about you touching that mailbox, the next conversation will happen in a federal office. The color drained from her face completely. Brad exhaled, shoulders sagging like a balloon, finally losing air. Let's just go, he murmured. But Scarlett wasn't done. Pride dies slowly. You'll regret this, she spat, pointing a trembling finger at me. You think this makes you the hero. You've made an enemy of the entire HOA. Then I guess I'll need more wire, I said. The neighbors who'd gathered on the sidewalk laughed under their breath. Mrs. Peterson, clutching her watering can like a trophy, muttered. Finally, someone stood up to her. Scarlett's eyes darted to the small crowd. That was the breaking point. You could see it the split second when her kingdom crumbled. The woman who once commanded fear now looked like a stage actress, realizing the curtain had dropped. She stormed off, dragging Brad behind her, shouting something about legal action and disrespectful men. The crowd dispersed, murmuring like satisfied theatergoers. That evening, as the sun dipped low, I sat on my porch, sipping coffee and reviewing the footage again, not out of obsession but appreciation. The scene replayed in slow motion, Scarlett's hand reaching the warning beep, the flinch, the shock, the stumble. I almost wished I could set it to music, maybe Beethoven, something dramatic. My phone buzzed an unknown number. I answered. Mr. White, the voice, was official, clipped, and serious. This is Agent Rogers with the U.S. Postal Inspection Service. Deputy Harris forwarded us your report. We'll need copies of your footage and statements. This appears to be part of a larger pattern of mail theft. Larger pattern, I asked. Yes. You're not the only one missing mail. Several residents in your area have reported similar issues. We believe your HOA president may be involved in multiple thefts. I tried not to sound delighted. I'll have the files ready for you tomorrow, Agent Rogers. After I hung up, I leaned back and stared at the quiet street. The once spotless kingdom of Scarlett Taylor was beginning to rot from the inside out, and all I had done was flip a switch. That night, for the first time in months, I slept like a man who didn't have to check his mailbox twice. But the peace wouldn't last long. Because in Maple Creek, nothing ever ends quietly, especially when justice makes headlines. By morning, the footage had somehow leaked onto social media. A neighbor had uploaded the moment of the shock heard around the block, with the caption, HOA president gets electrified justice. It spread faster than wildfire in suburbia. By noon, my mailbox had become a local landmark. Cars slowed down to take pictures. Someone even left a thank you note taped to the post. You did what we all dreamed of doing. Scarlett stayed inside for days. Rumor said she was lawyering up. But when you're guilty on camera, even lawyers can only do so much. I didn't know it yet, but the next knock on my door wouldn't come from Scarlett. It would come from the federal agents ready to end her reign for good. And this time the voltage wouldn't come from me. 2 days after the great mailbox meltdown, Maple Creek Lane transformed into something between a gossip column and a crime scene. Every lawn chair in the cul-de-sac became a front row seat to the unfolding HOA apocalypse. I didn't even have to open my blinds to hear the chatter. It drifted through the air like the smell of fresh-cut grass and scandal. Scarlett Taylor, Queen of the Covenants, had vanished from public view. Her immaculate Mercedes sat motionless in the driveway, and her perfect roses were wilting, as if even the plants were tired of pretending. But the silence didn't last long. That Thursday morning, 2 unmarked black sedans rolled into the neighborhood. The gold lettering on their windbreakers said United States Postal Inspection Service. One of the agents was the same man who'd called me Agent Rogers, mid-40s, clean-cut with the calm eyes of someone who'd seen too much suburban drama for one lifetime. He stepped out, nodded politely, and said, Mr. White, thanks for your cooperation. We'd like to take another look at the footage and possibly talk to a few of your neighbors. Be my guest, I said, motioning toward my porch. Maple Creek's never been this exciting. He cracked a faint smile. We'll see if your HOA president feels the same way. The investigation moved quickly. Within hours, the inspectors had spoken to nearly everyone on the street. Some neighbors were hesitant, afraid of HOA retaliation. Others, particularly Mrs. Peterson, were more than happy to share. I told them for years my mail went missing, she said, holding her little dog like a witness. Birthday cards from my grandkids, checks from my pension fund gone. And that woman had the nerve to tell me the Postal Service was losing integrity. Turns out the only thing losing integrity was her. It wasn't long before the agents had enough testimony to make their next move. By noon, a county sheriff's cruiser joined the lineup in front of Scarlett's home. The spectacle was impossible to ignore. Curtains twitched, cameras clicked, the doorbell rang, and the mighty Scarlett Taylor, once the terror of lawn violations and fence disputes, opened the door to find the law waiting on her welcome mat. I watched from my porch, not proud exactly, but profoundly satisfied. Agent Rogers held up a document. "Mrs. Taylor, we have a federal search warrant. We have reason to believe you've been in possession of stolen U.S. mail." Scarlett's expression flickered between outrage and disbelief. "This is insane," she snapped. "I've been the one protecting this community from disorder. This is harassment." Rogers didn't flinch. "Ma'am, step aside." Brad appeared behind her, looking exhausted, like a man who'd been trying to reason with a hurricane for years. He sighed and muttered, "Just cooperate, Scarlett." She spun on him, furious. "You told them, didn't you?" He stared back coldly. "No, but maybe I should have years ago." That one line cracked her. You could almost hear the sound of her authority shattering. The agents moved in. Within minutes, they began carrying boxes out of her home, literal boxes of stolen mail. Some still sealed, some torn open, some organized by name and date. The pile grew like evidence in a museum of pettiness. From across the street, I could read the labels Jenkins, Peterson, Alvarez, Miller. Every resident in the HOA had been hit. Agent Rogers flipped open one folder and shook his head. "She wasn't even trying to hide it," he said quietly to me. "We found a spreadsheet, dates, names, notes, like targeted and checked for payment. This wasn't impulse theft, it was systematic. Scarlett tried to spin it. I was cataloging delivery mistakes. Someone had to monitor the inefficiency of the postal system," Mrs. Peterson yelled from her porch. "You stole my husband's last birthday card, you snake." Scarlett's voice cracked. "I was protecting the community." Rogers looked at her evenly. From what Mrs. Taylor male neighbors laughed softly at first, then louder, the sound rippling through the neighborhood like a long suppressed sigh. The agents escorted Scarlett to the patrol car, her wrists cuffed neatly in front of her. Brad stood at the edge of their driveway, rubbing his temples, muttering, "I told her to stop." As they passed me, Scarlett turned, eyes blazing. "You think you've won, Daniel? You think this makes you better than me?" I tilted my head. "No, just better insulated." She let out a noise halfway between a growl and a sob as the door closed. Once the cars pulled away, the cul-de-sac erupted into applause. People I hadn't spoken to in months approached to shake my hand, thank me, or whisper stories about their own stolen letters. Turns out, Scarlett's crusade for HOA purity had been a smokescreen. She'd used her position to access residents' private information, intercept mail, and retaliate against anyone who disagreed with her. If someone argued at a meeting, their fines doubled mysteriously. If someone filed a complaint, their HOA paperwork went missing. She'd been running her own little empire of control until one jolt ended the dynasty. Later that afternoon, Agent Rogers returned to update me. "We recovered mail going back almost 4 years," he said. "Birthday cards, checks, legal documents, even prescriptions. Some of it's traceable, most of it she never destroyed. It's like she was collecting trophies." "She kept them?" I asked, incredulous. He nodded. "Every petty victory catalogued. We found a drawer labeled Ungrateful Residents." I let out a low whistle. "Sounds like she was running an archive of revenge." Rogers gave a half smile. "You're not wrong. We'll charge her with multiple counts of mail theft, obstruction, and abuse of authority. It's federal, so she's looking at prison time." Brad filed for divorce that night. I know because I saw him carrying a suitcase to his car, shaking his head as if shedding the last 20 years of HOA tyranny. He stopped at the end of my driveway. "I should have stopped her," he said quietly. She couldn't stand losing control." I nodded. Power does strange things to people, especially when no one ever tells them no. He looked up at my mailbox, my beautiful, humming, innocent-looking mailbox, and chuckled. "Guess someone finally did." The next morning, federal agents delivered stacks of recovered mail to residents. The cul-de-sac turned into a makeshift reunion. Neighbors laughed, cried, and opened envelopes they thought were lost forever. Mrs. Peterson found the card her late husband had mailed 2 years before he passed. She held it like something holy. The front read, "To my forever girl, keep smiling." Inside was a note in his shaky handwriting. "Even if I'm gone, remember the world is still kind." She cried quietly on her porch, clutching that card, then looked at me and whispered, "You brought him back to me." And for the first time in this whole ridiculous saga, I felt something deeper than satisfaction. I felt peace. By evening, the HOA board held an emergency meeting at the community center. Scarlett's nameplate was removed, replaced temporarily with acting chair. The mood was somber, humbling. Neighbors who'd once feared her were now talking freely about reform, transparency, accountability, fair elections. They even asked me to consider joining the new board. I declined politely. I prefer wiring things, not managing them, I said. As I walked home, I passed Scarlett's house, dark, empty, quiet. The roses had wilted completely. Her once perfect garden now looked wild and unkept. For all her control, she'd lost everything. And all it took was one spark. A month later, the neighborhood looked the same, but it felt different. The air around Maple Creek Lane was lighter, freer, as if someone had turned off a years-long static hum. Gone were the HOA memos taped to doors about grass height and mailbox paint shades. Gone were the passive-aggressive community newsletters about neighborly standards. And most importantly, gone was Scarlett Taylor, the woman who'd mistaken leadership for domination. Her arrest had made local headlines. HOA president charged in federal mail theft ring. It sounded almost cinematic, like a Netflix docuseries waiting to happen. Reporters camped outside the gate for 2 days, hoping to interview anyone who'd ever argued with her. Most residents, exhausted and embarrassed, refused to speak, but some, like Mrs. Peterson, couldn't resist. "That man with the mailbox saved us all," she told a camera crew proudly, her little dog yapping beside her. "You can't bully people forever. Eventually the current catches up to you." Scarlett pled guilty after the evidence became overwhelming. Boxes of stolen mail, handwritten logs, screenshots of HOA complaints. She'd intercepted. It was an open and shut case. Her lawyer tried to argue that she'd been emotionally distressed and overwhelmed by civic duty, but the judge wasn't buying it. When the verdict came, the courtroom was packed. I attended not out of malice, but curiosity. Scarlett stood at the defense table in a beige suit, looking smaller than I'd ever seen her. The same woman who once dictated the color of my mailbox, now clutching a tissue like a lifeline. The judge's words were brief and merciless. Mail theft is not community service. 2 years in federal custody, restitution to all victims, and permanent removal from the Maple Creek HOA board. Her shoulders sagged. For a second, I thought she might finally look at me, maybe apologize, maybe glare. Instead, she just stared straight ahead, blank and brittle. After court reporters swarmed the steps, microphones thrust, flashes popped, questions flew. "Do you feel vindicated, Mr. White?" one asked. I gave the only answer that felt true. I just wanted my mail. Back in Maple Creek, change happened fast. The HOA held an emergency election. This time, people actually showed up, real turnout, not just Scarlett's loyal cronies. A retired teacher named Helen was elected as interim president. Her first act, cancel every nonsense fine Scarlett had ever issued. Her second, call a neighborhood potluck to celebrate surviving tyranny. The potluck became more than food, it was therapy. Neighbors who hadn't spoken in years laughed together again. Kids played in driveways that once had noise violation notices taped to them. Someone even brought a cake shaped like a mailbox with frosting lightning bolts. I didn't know who baked it, but the message in red icing said it all: justice delivered. Marcus, my partner in electric crime, came too. He handed me a six-pack and raised a toast. To voltage vindication and very creative engineering. We clinked bottles. And to never underestimating the power of a well-placed capacitor, I said. Later that evening, Helen made an announcement. "We've decided to update the HOA charter," she said, holding up a sheet of paper. "From now on, no board member can access private resident data, mailboxes, or deliveries. And we're instituting term limits." Applause erupted. Someone shouted. "And background checks for anyone who likes clipboards." The laughter was warm, forgiving. The neighborhood felt human again. Over the next few weeks, residents began receiving mail returned by the Postal Inspection Service, items Scarlett had hoarded like trophies. Each one told a story of inconvenience, anger, or quiet heartbreak. But for some, it was more than that. It was closure. Mrs. Peterson's recovered card from her late husband became the emotional heart of the neighborhood. She framed it, glass and all, and placed it on her porch table. "He always said there's good left in people," she told me one morning, smiling softly. Guess he was right, even if it took a bit of electricity to find it. Her gratitude hit deeper than I expected. It reminded me that this had started as a small, selfish desire to get back what was mine, and ended up freeing everyone from a person who'd quietly taken so much more. One afternoon, as I checked my perfectly functioning mailbox, now equipped with a legal lock motion camera and a small engraved plaque that read "Respect Boundaries," a familiar voice called out. It was Brad Taylor, standing awkwardly by the curb, hands in his pockets. "Didn't expect to see you again," I said. He sighed. "I'm just picking up the last of my things. House goes on the market next week." I nodded. "Sorry it ended like this." He managed a weak smile. "Honestly, I'm not." She was impossible. I tried to stop her. She thought the HOA made her untouchable. Turns out federal law disagreed, I said. He chuckled. You know she blamed you even at sentencing. Said you electrocuted her reputation. I grinned. That's not inaccurate. We shook hands. For all his arrogance before Brad now looked like a man freed from a long, embarrassing captivity. As he drove off, I felt something unexpected, not triumph, but closure. 6 months later, Maple Creek was unrecognizable. The lawns looked the same, but people smiled more. Kids biked freely. The HOA newsletter now featured real news, bake sales, movie nights, dog adoptions, not fines or veiled threats. And then one morning, a small envelope appeared in my mailbox. No return address. Just my name written in familiar cursive. Inside was a single postcard, a photo of a gray building behind a chain-link fence. The caption read, Federal Correctional Institution, Greenville. The message was short, you ruined my life, but I still think you cheated. Scarlett. I stared at it for a long time, half amused, half sad. Then I pinned it to my corkboard next to a photo of my mailbox gleaming in the sunlight. Right above it I wrote with a Sharpie lesson accountability conducts. That evening, as the sun set over Maple Creek, I sat on my porch with a cup of coffee, watching families stroll down the street, the same street that had once felt like a stage for constant HOA theater. Now it felt alive again. People waved. Someone called, Hey Daniel, you're a legend. I raised my mug in mock salute. Just an electrician for justice. The laughter that followed felt warm and real. I thought back to Scarlett, to the smugness, the control, the way she believed her title made her untouchable. It reminded me how small acts of power can spiral into something monstrous when no one pushes back, and how easy it is to forget that community means cooperation, not control. In the end, I didn't defeat her with anger. I defeated her with boundaries, literal and electrical. And that's a kind of poetry I'll never get tired of. Sometimes justice doesn't arrive in a courtroom or a headline. Sometimes it hums quietly in 12 volts, waiting for the right moment to remind the world that no one is above consequences. I looked at my mailbox one last time that evening. It stood there, solid, shining, and innocent. My little monument to peaceful resistance. I almost laughed, thinking that something so small had rewired an entire neighborhood, and maybe in a weird way, rewired me too. This whole ordeal taught me something I never expected to learn from an HOA drama, that boundaries aren't just about property lines. They're about dignity. About not letting people take what's yours, whether it's mail, peace, or self-respect. Scarlett thought power meant control. But real power is restraint, knowing when to fight, how to fight, and doing it without losing your humanity. If you've ever dealt with someone like her, a bully in a blazer hiding behind rules, remember, silence feeds them. Documentation and persistence defeat them. And if you can add creativity to the mix, well, sometimes justice comes with a spark. To anyone watching, don't let fear or politics keep you from standing up for what's right. Whether it's a boss, a neighbor, or an entire HOA, remember, rules were made to protect fairness, not to weaponize it. So stand firm, stay kind, and if necessary, wire your mailbox responsibly. Now tell me in the comments, have you ever had a Scarlett in your neighborhood? And don't forget to subscribe, because in the world of HOA stories, karma's always just one voltage away.